Every morning when I wake up, I got a new step. It's because of him I can face what's next. No matter what I'm going through, he's the answer. That's the reason why I sing his praise like an anthem. And did I mention that he can't lose? I lost count of how many times he came through. Strong God, ain't no mountain that he can't move. And every day I just need a fresh encounter with you.
I feel renewed, refreshed. I can conquer every day, no stress. I can win with you. And all I need is a fresh encounter with you.
Hey friends, thanks for joining us on today's episode of A Fresh Encounter. Now, for the last several weeks, we have been dealing with answers to life's most difficult questions. My kids often say, "Dad, life be lifin'." And that's true. Life throws curveballs at us. Often we are faced with unexpected challenges. But the most unfortunate part is not the challenges themselves, it's where we go to get answers for the challenges. Often we go to all of the wrong sources. And so what we've been talking about for the last several weeks is, number one, not just what these questions are, these difficult issues of life, but where do we go to get trustworthy solutions? We've been going to the most trustworthy source ever, and that is the Word of God. Now, on today's episode, we're going to deal with a big issue of life, and that is discouragement. You know, discouragement is the enemy's greatest tactic that he uses against people. But often we don't know how to deal with it. That's what we're going to deal with on today's episode. Let's jump in. I want you to meet me in Nehemiah chapter 4, and I want to start at verse number 10. It says, "Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, 'The strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall.' Also, our enemies said, 'Before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them and will kill them and put an end to the work.' Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, 'Wherever you turn, they will attack us.'" We're going to talk about how do we deal with discouragement. Now, if I were to ask you to name the world's deadliest disease, what would be your answer? Some of you, would you say COVID? Some of you might be thinking cancer. Others may think AIDS or Ebola. But here's what you probably wouldn't say. You wouldn't say discouragement. See, most of us don't even think of discouragement as a deadly disease, but it actually is. And it is more common than any of those other diseases that you may have been thinking about, cancer and AIDS and Ebola and COVID. Let me tell you why discouragement is a deadly disease. It's deadly. It's legitimately dangerous for a few reasons. First, it's universal. What I mean is everybody gets discouraged from time to time. Discouragement doesn't discriminate. Another thing is it's recurring. See, the thing about discouragement is it doesn't just hit you one time in your life. Discouragement is recurring. It may hit you in one season and come back in another season. It may hit you in 1 month and then come back 2 months later because it's recurring. But here's one, it's highly contagious. This is another reason why discouragement is deadly and dangerous. It's highly contagious because you can get discouraged from other people and other people can get discouraged from you. Now, in part 2 of this teaching series several weeks ago, we dealt with the tough question of how to deal with depression. The thing is, discouragement and depression are often connected. Think about it this way. If depression is the basement, then discouragement is one of the final steps on the stairs heading down to the basement. See, discouragement is probably, and I think probably is not the best word, I would say it's arguably the enemy's greatest tactic against believers. You know, in Ephesians 6 and verse 16, Paul says, in addition to all of this, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all of the flaming arrows of the evil one. See, the Apostle Paul in Ephesians is talking about the whole armor of God. And you get to verse 16 and he's talking about the shield of faith that we have to have. He says, because you need to be able to extinguish the flaming arrows of the evil one. In other words, what Paul is painting a picture of is that every day the enemy is shooting flaming arrows at us. And I really believe that those flaming arrows also include, most importantly, discouragement. Every day, the enemy is trying to discourage you. And Paul says, you got to handle that with your shield of faith. Let me tell you why this is significant. Because the enemy can't do anything about God's plan for your life. But what he can do is so discourage you that you no longer pursue God's plan for your life. See, what the enemy wants is for you to become so discouraged that you ultimately step away from God's plan for your life, or that you become so discouraged that you step down into the basement, into despair and depression. And when that happens, despair and depression often paralyzes you, so you stop moving towards God's plan. I have seen it happen far too many times in my life. In all of the years that I have been serving in ministry, I have seen people become so discouraged that they just walk away. They walk away from marriages. They walk away from purpose. They walk away from their blessed place. They walk away from relationships. They walk away from opportunities. They throw their hands up out of discouragement and frustration. And in a moment that is emotionally charged, they walk away and throw their hands up and give up on the very thing that God called them to. Now, here's the good news. The good news is that discouragement is curable, meaning we don't have to wallow in discouragement or allow it to distract us from God's plan and God's best for our lives. You know, Nehemiah was an incredible leader. Matter of fact, all year in our spiritual leadership collective, I've been walking our spiritual leaders through the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was the leader of a group of Jews that had returned from Babylonian exile. And their desire was to rebuild the walls around Jerusalem. When the nation of Israel were taken out of Israel and spent 70 years in Babylonian captivity, a part of that transition was that Israel was demolished. It was destroyed. The temple was destroyed. The walls around the city that protected the city, all of that was demolished. And so when you read the book of Ezra, we were looking at it recently. If you've been doing your soap devotion with us, Ezra goes to rebuild the temple. Nehemiah comes behind Ezra to rebuild the walls. Now, when they first start rebuilding the wall, they are super excited. They had lots of fervor and zeal about the project. But after working on it for a while, by the time we get to the verses we read a moment ago in chapter 4, they had become very, very discouraged. Now they want to give up. Now they want to walk away. Now they want to throw in the towel and literally don't want to continue the work, the important work of rebuilding the wall. See, when chapter 4 opens, everybody is excited. Everybody is on a high note. As a matter of fact, in verse 6 of Nehemiah 4, it says, "So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart." So they start off real excited. But as the story continues, the mood dramatically changes and they get discouraged. Man, don't we know what that feels like? Often when we start a new relationship or start a new job or start a new project or get into a new place, it feels really exciting and we're all giddy and we're hopeful and we're really excited about the possibilities. But then as time goes on and as challenges and difficulties arise, often we can go from excited to discouraged. See, this episode in the life of Nehemiah and the Israelites teach us 4 reasons why we often become discouraged in the first place. And it also teaches us how to deal with discouragement when it comes knocking on the door of our lives. So number 1, let's deal with why do we become discouraged in the first place? Why do we become discouraged? In order to deal with discouragement, we first have to understand why we become discouraged in the first place. And this passage reveals several reasons why we often become discouraged. The first reason is fatigue or tiredness. Fatigue or tiredness. Let me show you something. Meet me in verse 10 of Nehemiah 4. In the A clause of verse 10, it says, Meanwhile, the people of Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out. In other words, the people had worked themselves to exhaustion. They were just worn out. They were physically, mentally, and emotionally drained. And y'all, this is a big deal and a big issue that we don't often talk about. We just go and go and go and go and go and never really assess the toll that tiredness and fatigue takes on us, but not just us personally. It affects our attitude. It affects our outlook. Man, I mean, it affects everything. You know, the many years that I've been doing ministry, I've had people come to me over those years for pastoral wisdom. And they've said things to me like, well, maybe I should just quit. Or maybe I should get a divorce. Or maybe I should just give up. Maybe I should just walk away. But the problem that they are actually reacting to is not the real problem. The real problem is that they're just tired. They need some rest. They need some relaxation. They need some renewal. And so because they are exhausted, because they are fatigued, they are often overreacting and wanting to walk away or give up on something that is really not the problem. See, sometimes the most spiritual thing that you can do is get some rest. Sometimes the most spiritual thing that you could do is to take some time off and go on vacation. My goodness, that's a word for somebody up in here today. That's the word from the Lord. Somebody didn't even know that that was actually a spiritual thing. You mean to tell me vacations are spiritual? Absolutely they are. Check this out. When does discouragement often occur? Let me show you something. Go back to verse 6. It says in Nehemiah 4 and 6, so we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. Did you see that? Did you catch it? So we rebuilt the wall till it reached half its height. See, you are the most prone to get discouraged when you are halfway through a project. Let me tell you something. Everybody works hard at first. Everybody does. The verse says that they worked with all their heart in the beginning. Why? Because the project was new. It was exciting and noble at first. But after a while, guess what? The newness wore off. That new car smell was gone. And then people start getting discouraged. Let me ask you something. Have you ever started a project and then you get halfway done with it and realize how much more work you have to do? And then you start thinking to yourself, why did I do this? A couple of years ago, my family and I had the opportunity to go to southern Spain on a vacation. And there's a picture that I'm going to show you, but I want to give you some context. My wife, the super adventurous one, she was like, hey, I found out that there are these cave kind of, I don't know what it's even called. It was like, exploring a cave in Spain. And you had to put on, stuff, like wetsuits and, you're sliding down rocks and stuff and, going in the water and you're in a cave. And initially she said, hey, I think this would be a great opportunity for the kids. Initially I was like, cool, let's go. Well, number one, I didn't know how dangerous it was going to be. Number two, I didn't know how long it was going to take for us to get through this thing. And so let me tell you something. By the time you see this picture, I want you to see how frustrated that look is on my face, because I started off like, yes, I'm ready to go. By the time I got halfway through it, I was like, get me up out of here. Because I was thinking, man, if somebody falls, hurts themselves, breaks their neck, every rock we climbed over, I was praying, Lord, please don't let nobody hurt themselves. Because I know what it's like to start something and be excited. But then you get halfway through with it and you're like, what in the world am I doing? See, fatigue and tiredness is the number one cause of discouragement, and it often happens at the halfway mark. That's why so many people leave so many things undone. So many projects people start, so many ideas people start, and they don't finish because they get halfway done and fatigue and tiredness sets in. Here's another reason why we get discouraged. B is frustration. Yeah. The second reason why we often become discouraged is frustration. Let's go back to verse 10 of Nehemiah 4. It says, meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there's so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. Do you hear that? That's frustration talking. They are disheartened and frustrated over what seemed to be an absolutely impossible situation.
This is Tamika.
And this is Jeff.
And here's your TWC News. Build your marriage on more than a hope and a prayer.
Allow Symbis to give you a personalized roadmap to making your marriage everything it is meant to be.
Through Symbis, you can receive premarital counseling as well as marital counseling.
So visit our website and find out more about Symbis today.
Leadership Academy is where we empower and equip individuals to serve in ministry with confidence and purpose.
This program provides practical training to help you lead with passion and excellence.
Whether you're called to preach, teach, or support behind the scenes, register now for Leadership Academy and take the next step in your ministerial journey.
TWC's family gathering takes place on the fourth Sunday of each month at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time via Zoom. This is the gateway to understanding TWC's history, our faith, and how our shared values can make a difference in the lives of so many.
Whether you are a lifelong member of TWC or just checking us out, consider this your open invitation. We host the family gathering via Zoom so that no matter where you are in the world, you can connect. Register now online or in the app and discover the warmth of community at TWC through our family gathering. The Magic City Classic Weekend will culminate on Sunday, October 27th at TWC with College Sunday. Yes, it's time to rep your favorite school.
So wear your Alabama State, Alabama A&M, UAB, Talladega, Clark Atlanta, Florida A&M, Alabama, or Auburn apparel. Show your school spirit Sunday, October 27th.
And be sure to invite your friends and family who are in town for the weekend.
TWC is committed to making a difference, but we can't do it without you.
Scan the QR code on the screen or on the seat in front of you and complete a short survey addressing a few critical areas of our ministry. Thanks in advance for helping us make a difference in your life.
Well, brothers and sisters, that's it for today's news.
Visit twccc.org for full details of each event. Have an incredible week, family.
They are disheartened and frustrated over what seemed to be an absolutely impossible situation. Now check this out. They were frustrated by all of the rubble around them. Now, what is rubble? Rubble is pieces of rock and debris from dirt and dried out mortar. So get this, they were complaining about the junk or the leftovers from the project that they were currently working on. This rubble became their cause of frustration, which means that they lost sight of their goal and became distracted by stuff that didn't really matter. They were working on rebuilding the wall. And whenever you are rebuilding the wall, you're going to have pieces of rock and mortar that are lying around because that's a part of the progress. See, whenever you work on a project or focus on something, there's bound to be some waste or some junk that's going to accumulate while you're completing the project. Now, sometimes this waste and junk is actually the collateral, the side effect of the project that you are doing. A few years ago, my wife and I, we actually had to redo the kitchen in our home. We had some water damage, and so we had to redo the kitchen. So we hired a company, and they came in, and they initially told us that, it was going to take a couple of weeks. It ended up taking a couple of months. And we couldn't even use our kitchen, and, they had plastic up. And it was just a mess. It was inconvenient, and it was frustrating. But here's the point. Every time we got tempted to get frustrated, we had to remember that, wait a minute, the goal, though, is that when this is all said and done, we're going to have a new kitchen, one that we're going to be excited about. And so every time we were tempted to get frustrated because we couldn't use our kitchen and had to eat out and had to walk all around our house just to get to other parts of the house that we would normally get to through cutting through the kitchen, we had to remind ourselves that, wait a minute, we can't allow the frustration to make us lose sight of and give up on the goal of having a brand new kitchen. And I tell you that story because here's the question for you. What is the rubbish in your life? What is the junk and the trash that has accumulated that is really small and trivial in the grand scheme of things, but you allow it to consume your energy and distract you from what you really should be focused on? What is the rubbish in your life? What is that stuff that gets in the way? What is the stuff that presents as interruptions and distractions that keeps you from accomplishing your goals? You know, I miss my mom dearly. My mom passed in 2019 to pancreatic cancer, but my mother was an absolutely amazing cook. And the thing about when my mother would cook is, y'all, my mother would cook up a storm. I mean, literally, you would come in the kitchen after she finished, and it looked like a storm had gone through there. And after she would cook these elaborate, incredible meals, the kitchen was all messed up. And then she would always say, now, son, you got to clean the kitchen. And often I would walk in that kitchen like, golly, like, where do I start? Because it was just stuff all over the place. You know, pasta sauce on the cabinets. I mean, just, it was a mess. Now, the food was good, but it was a mess. And I used to get so frustrated. And Mom would say, why you got an attitude? And I would say, because you left this mess behind. And I remember going back and forth, you know, and then I was a kid and I had really no say about it. But as I got a little bit older, I said, hey, Mom, can I make a suggestion? I don't mind cleaning the kitchen, but how about I come in the kitchen earlier and I clean as you cook? And she was like, you know what, that's a great idea. So she would cook and I would clean on the go, meaning as she went, I would clean. See, that's what you have to do to make sure that you don't become frustrated when you're working on a project or working on something new. You got to deal with the rubble as you move forward. You can't allow the rubble to pile up and cause you to get to a place where you're frustrated. Just deal with that, organize it, put it aside as you go so that you don't turn around one day and now you got all of this other junk that you have to deal with. Because rubble is one of the reasons that we end up frustrated and end up discouraged. Here's another reason: failure. Failure is another reason why we often struggle with discouragement. The third reason why people become discouraged is failure. And I know this because let me show you something. Pay attention to what the Israelites are saying in verse number 10. Let's go back to verse 10. It says, meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. What they are saying here is, we're just too tired. We're too frustrated. It's not possible. It is foolish to keep going. We give up. Nehemiah, we give up. See, the problem here is failure. The people were unable to finish the task as quickly as they had originally planned. And as a result, their confidence plummeted. They lost heart. They got discouraged. See, in other words, they said, we can't do it. We can't do it. This is impossible, so we're just going to give up. Now, we talked about failure a few weeks ago in this teaching series, and I told you that this is a really big topic that actually needs more than just one message. That's why I want to revisit it again, because it's here again in Nehemiah 4 under the umbrella of discouragement. How do you handle failure in your life? That's the question. Do you have a pity party? Is your attitude, oh, poor me, I can't get this done, I don't even know why I tried? I mean, do you start complaining? Do you say to yourself that it is impossible, that it can't be done? Do you say things like, man, I was a fool to even try, this is just crazy? Or do you point the finger and blame everybody else? It's everybody else's issue. They didn't do their part. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. You know, one of the biggest differences between high achievers and mediocre people is that high achievers see failure as only a temporary setback. I love studying the biographies and the history of people that have achieved great things. And as I mentioned in the message on failure, they've all failed, But the difference between high achievers and people who are mediocre is high achievers recognize that failure is just a temporary setback. There are lessons to be learned, but they gather those lessons, gather that wisdom, and then they move on, they move forward so that they go ahead with the goals that they have for their lives. That's what God calls us to do. I'm talking to somebody this morning, and you may be going through a season of difficulty or maybe even failure, but it's a temporary setback. There's some things that God is trying to teach you for where He's ultimately taking you. Let me move to the next one. Here's the fourth reason why we often struggle with discouragement. Fear. This is a big one. Fear is the fourth reason why we get discouraged. Check out what the nation of Israel say in verse 11. Check out what they say next to Nehemiah. Nehemiah 4 and verse 11, they say, "And also our enemy said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them and will kill them and put an end to the work." So check this out. There were people in the land of Israel who did not want the wall to be rebuilt. These are the enemies of the Jews, Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, and others. They didn't want to see this wall rebuilt because a wall around the city represented safety and defense. So those enemies did not want the wall to be refinished. And so the first thing that these enemies did was they started criticizing the Jews. And then they started ridiculing them. And then when none of that stuff worked, the final thing they did was they threatened them. They said, "Yo, we're going to kill you if you rebuild this wall." So the workers became discouraged. Well, family, unfortunately, we are out of time, but we are not done with this word. So I want to encourage you, join us online at twccc.org. There you can watch this message in its entirety. You can connect with us. You can get access to some life-changing resources that will enhance your walk with God. You can also make a life-changing decision to give your life to Christ, to get connected to our amazing church family, and take important next steps. Also want to encourage you, if this message and this ministry has impacted your life in any way, would you consider sowing a seed through this ministry? It is because of you and your seed sowing that we're actually on the air, and we are looking forward to expanding our television ministry and continuing to bring the hope and answers that only Christ can provide to those who desperately need it. Well, listen, thanks for joining us, and I hope to see you next time on A Fresh Encounter.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Fresh Encounter. For more from Van Moody, visit vanmoody.org, where you can access free resources, subscribe to the Freedom Podcast, as well as find great gift ideas for yourself or a friend. Also, be sure to connect with us on all social media platforms. We look forward to seeing you next time on Fresh Encounter.